1. Introduction. The tragic fate of Prince Myshkin. Walking into a room full of people. Each person is wearing a mask. Some are smiling, some are frowning, but none of them reveal their true faces. Now picture stepping into this room without a mask of your own, without any deception, without pretense. Imagine walking into a world where you refuse to manipulate or control others, where your every word is unfiltered, and your actions come from a place of genuine kindness and honesty. How long do you think you would last in such a world? How quickly would you be dismissed as naive, foolish, or even weak? This is the tragic fate of Prince Myshkin. The protagonist of Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot, Myshkin is a man whose heart is pure, whose honesty is unwavering, and whose compassion knows no bounds. He is, in every sense of the word, good. Yet instead of being admired for his goodness, he is ridiculed, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed by a society that cannot comprehend or appreciate such qualities. This is not just a story set in 19th century Russia. This tale of suffering, misunderstanding, and rejection is a reflection of a painful truth about human nature. Truth that remains as relevant today as it did in Dostoevsky's time. Why do good people so often find themselves at a disadvantage in the world? Why do sincerity, kindness, and honesty often lead to mockery rather than respect? And perhaps the most important question of all, if being good inevitably leads to suffering, is it still worth it? By the end of this exploration, you will have a new perspective on kindness, morality, and the hidden dangers of being too good in a world that rewards cunning. The final revelation we will uncover is the most shocking of all, and it will change the way you see not only the world, but also yourself. 2. Society's true values. Why goodness often seems foolish. To understand why goodness is so often mistaken for foolishness, we must first examine what society truly values. I'd like to think that we admire honesty, kindness, and integrity, but do we really? Or do we simply tolerate these qualities when they do not interfere with our own interests? Throughout history, those who rise to power and influence are rarely those who are purely good. Instead, they are the individuals who know how to navigate the complexities of human relationships. They understand when to be ruthless, when to be charming, and how to hide their true intentions behind carefully constructed personas. Machiavelli, in his famous work The Prince, argued that a ruler must be willing to act immorally if necessary because the world does not reward goodness, it rewards results. This is precisely why Myshkin's fate is so tragic. He does not understand or refuses to accept the rules of the world he lives in. He does not know how to manipulate or deceive, nor does he have any desire to. And because of this, he is viewed as an idiot. Not because he lacks intelligence, but because his goodness makes him vulnerable in a society that thrives on self-interest and competition. 3. The real-world application of Myshkin's tragedy. Think about how this applies to the real world. How often do we see truly kind and honest people being taken advantage of? How many times have we heard stories of good-hearted individuals who are betrayed by those they trust? We all had moments where we felt foolish for believing in the best in others, only to be disappointed. This is not to say that the world is entirely corrupt, but it is undeniable that a certain level of cunning and manipulation is often necessary for survival. Even those who consider themselves to be good people must sometimes compromise their values to protect themselves from harm. And yet, despite all of this, we still long for figures like Myshkin, people who are truly unshakably good. But here's where things become even more interesting. Dostoevsky does not present Myshkin as a simple martyr or a tragic figure doomed to failure. For Myshkin's goodness as a mirror, Dostoevsky does not present Prince Myshkin as a mere victim or a passive martyr. He is not just someone who suffers silently, he also challenges those around him in ways they do not fully understand. Myshkin's goodness is far from passive. It acts as a mirror, forcing others to confront their own flaws and moral contradictions. This is what makes people so uncomfortable around him. He does not judge others directly, but his very existence exposes their hypocrisy. His sincerity highlights their deception. His kindness makes their selfishness all the more apparent. And instead of being embraced for the light he brings into the world, he is rejected. This brings us to a fundamental question. Is it Myshkin who is the fool, Or is it the world around him that has lost its way? As we continue, we will explore this paradox in greater depth and examine what it truly means to be good in a world that does not seem to value goodness. We will also uncover the ultimate truth about kindness, a truth that might just change the way you see everything. 5. The discomfort of true goodness. What makes Myshkin's story so tragic is not just the suffering he endures, but the way he is perceived by those around him. He does not see himself as a fool. He believes in love, in honesty, and in the goodness of human nature. Yet, the more he tries to bring light into the lives of others, the more they see him as an outsider, someone who does not belong in their world. But why? Why does true goodness so often create discomfort? To answer this, we need to look at how people interact with one another. Human relationships, whether personal or societal, are built on a delicate balance of power. Even in the most casual interactions, there is an unspoken negotiation happening beneath the surface. People measure their words carefully, choose their actions strategically, and adjust their behavior based on what they expect in return. It is a world of subtle manipulation and calculation, where even kindness is often given with an expectation of reciprocity. But Myshkin does not play this game. He gives without expecting anything in return, speaks with complete honesty, without calculating how his words might be received, forgives without holding resentment, even when others betray him repeatedly. In a world where everyone wears a mask, he is completely unguarded, and this is exactly why people do not trust him. 6. Cognitive dissonance. The uncomfortable truth. Psychologists have long studied the concept of cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension that arises when we are confronted with information or behavior that contradicts our beliefs about ourselves. When Myshkin interacts with others, he forces them to confront their own moral contradictions. They may claim to value kindness, but when faced with true unconditional goodness, they feel exposed. It forces them to realize how far they have drifted from their own ideals. Rather than accepting this uncomfortable truth, they reject the person who reveals it to them. Think about how we often react to people who are exceptionally good. When we hear stories of selfless individuals who dedicate their lives to helping others, we admire them. But sometimes, we also feel a strange discomfort. We tell ourselves that they are different from us, that their level of selflessness is unrealistic, even impractical. We may even look for flaws in them, searching for evidence that they are not as pure as they seem. Why? Because accepting their goodness would mean questioning our own choices, our own moral justifications. This is exactly what happens to Myshkin. He becomes a symbol of something unattainable and ideal that people admire in theory, but reject in practice. His presence disrupts the social order, not through force, but simply by existing. Dostoevsky uses Myshkin as character to explore a deeper truth about human nature. We do not truly want perfect goodness in our lives. We think we do, but when faced with it, we find it overwhelming, even suffocating. 7. The power and paradox of goodness. Without calculation, without boundaries, and without the usual human flaws, is something that most people do not know how to handle. And because of this, rather than elevating the good person, society often isolates them. But does this mean that goodness is meaningless? Does it mean that being a good person is a mistake? This is where things get even more complex. Despite all the suffering he endures, Myshkin does not regret his kindness. He does not become bitter or wish to change who he is. In this, Dostoevsky offers us a profound insight. The value of goodness does not lie in how others perceive it. It lies in its inherent nature. 8. The hidden power of goodness. What is the real power of goodness? If it is so often misunderstood, ridiculed, and rejected, in the final pages of The Idiot, Myshkin's fate is sealed. He is broken by the cruelty and complexity of the world around him. But does this mean he was truly a fool? Or was he, in the end, the only one who truly saw reality for what it was? Dostoevsky does not give us a simple answer. There's no easy resolution. However, what we do learn is that true goodness is not about being rewarded or even acknowledged. It exists for its own sake, not because society values it or because it will bring glory, success, or comfort. In this sense, Myshkin's story is not just about the tragedy of a good man being destroyed by a corrupt world. It is about the power of goodness itself. The world may reject it, the world may mock it, and the world may even try to destroy it, but goodness endures. It is the invisible force that subtly changes lives and ripples through the world even when we don't realize it. 9. Goodness as a force of change. Despite his tragic fate, Myshkin does leave a lasting impact on those around him. Even those who reject him, those who ridicule him and try to harm him, cannot forget him. His sincerity, his compassion, and his unwavering belief in the goodness of others act as a mirror that reflects back to people the deepest, most hidden parts of themselves. This is the secret power of true goodness. It reveals the truth. It does not force, it does not demand, it does not manipulate. It simply exists, and by existing, it forces those around it to confront their own nature. Some respond to this revelation by embracing it. They recognize the goodness within themselves and seek to align their actions with it. To others, unable to bear what they see in themselves, reject it. They choose to turn away from the mirror rather than face the uncomfortable truth. But no one remains unchanged. Think about the moments in your own life when you have encountered true kindness that was given freely, without expectation. It may have been something small, something seemingly insignificant, but did it not stay with you? Did it not challenge you, even for just a moment, to reconsider your own actions, your own beliefs, your own way of being in the world? This is the paradox of goodness. Though often dismissed as weakness, it is one of the most powerful forces in existence. It does not seek control, yet it influences. It does not fight, yet it changes. It does not demand, yet it inspires. And yet, this power comes with a cost. The cost of goodness. Dostoevsky understood that in a world built on self-interest and survival, those who embody pure goodness will often suffer. They will be misunderstood, they will be taken advantage of, and they will often feel as though they do not belong. But he also understood something even more profound. The suffering of the good is not meaningless. It is not a sign that they have failed in their mission. On the contrary, the suffering of the good is proof that they have remained true to themselves in a world that constantly tries to corrupt them. Think about the great spiritual and moral leaders throughout history, figures like Jesus, Socrates, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. All of these individuals dedicated their lives to ideals of justice, truth, and compassion. Yet each of them faced immense suffering. They were met with opposition, persecution, and, in many cases, violent ends. Why? Why does the world seem to resist goodness rather than embrace it? One possible explanation lies in the idea that true goodness is disruptive. It challenges the status quo. It forces people to confront their own moral contradictions. And most people, whether they realize it or not, do not want to be confronted with those contradictions. They want to continue living their lives as they always have, without being forced to examine their own selfishness, their own compromises, and their own willingness to prioritize personal gain over moral integrity. 11. The paradox of Myshkin's fought when Myshkin enters the world of Russian high society. He does not fit into its structure. The people around him operate within a system of hidden motives, strategic relationships, and constant maneuvering for power and status. Myshkin does not participate in any of this. He is an anomalous someone who does not play the game, and as a result, he becomes a threat to the very fabric of society. The world cannot categorize him, and when it cannot categorize someone, it either absorbs them into the system or casts them out. Myshkin, unwilling to conform, is ultimately rejected. This brings us to a crucial point. If suffering is often the fate of good people, then what is the purpose of being good? Is it worth it? Dostoevsky's answer is not easy, nor is it comforting. He does not suggest that goodness will always be rewarded, or that it will lead to success in the traditional sense. Instead, he presents a more complex and unsettling idea. The value of goodness is not determined by the world's reaction to it. Goodness, in its purest form, is not about outcomes. It is not about being praised, loved, or even understood. It is not about success, recognition, or external rewards. Goodness exists for its own sake. It is valuable because it is good, not because of what it brings or what it results in. 12. The ultimate revelation about goodness, goodness, is so pure, so powerful, then why does it so often lead to suffering? Why do the most honest, selfless, and compassionate people seem to face the greatest betrayals, disappointments, and hardships? This question lies at the very heart of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Prince Myshkin does everything in his power to bring kindness and understanding into the world. Yet, instead of being rewarded for it, he is ridiculed, misunderstood, and ultimately destroyed. But Dostoevsky does not present this as a meaningless tragedy. Rather, he forces us to look deeper into the nature of suffering itself. There is an undeniable connection between goodness and suffering. And this is something that has been explored not only in literature, but also in philosophy, psychology, and religious thought. Throughout history, many of the most revered figures, whether spiritual leaders, social reformers, or great thinkers, have faced immense suffering. Jesus, Socrates, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. are just a few examples of individuals who dedicated their lives to ideals of justice, truth, and compassion, and all of them met with opposition, persecution, and, in many cases, violent ends. But why? Why does the world seem to resist goodness rather than embrace it? 13. Why does the world resist goodness? One possible explanation lies in the idea that true goodness is disruptive. It challenges the status quo. It forces people to confront their own moral contradictions. And most people, whether they realize it or not, do not want to be confronted with those contradictions. They want to continue living their lives as they always have, without being forced to examine their own selfishness, their compromises, or their willingness to prioritize personal gain over moral integrity. Goodness, especially in its purest form, disrupts the social structures we've built to make ourselves feel comfortable in the world. When someone like Myshkin enters that world and refuses to participate in the deception and gamesmanship that define it, society cannot handle it. The anomaly cannot be easily absorbed, so it is either forced to conform or pushed to sideridge, dictated, and labeled as foolishness. This is the tragic fate of those who choose goodness in a world that thrives on manipulation and power dynamics. 14. Goodness for its own sake. Here is where Dostoevsky offers a profound insight. The value of goodness does not lie in how others perceive it. It does not need validation. Goodness is not about being praised, loved, or even understood. It is not about success, recognition, or external rewards. Goodness, in its purest form, exists for its own sake. It is valuable because it is good, regardless of whether the world appreciates it or not. This is a difficult and unsettling idea, because it contradicts everything we are taught to believe. We are conditioned to seek validation, to measure our actions by their results, and to expect fairness and justice in return for our efforts. Yet true goodness does not operate on those principles. It is not transactional. It does not ask, "What will I get in return?" It simply exists. 15. The power of goodness in the face of rejection. This brings us to a final, crucial question. If goodness is so powerful, then what is its true purpose in a world that does not value it? If goodness does not lead to worldly rewards or success, then does it have any real power? Dostoevsky does not give us a definitive answer to this question. What he does offer is an exploration of the lasting impact of goodness. Though Myshkin suffers and is rejected, he leaves a mark on everyone he encounters. Even those who mock him, betray him, or hurt him are transformed by their interactions with him. His sincerity, compassion, and unwavering belief in the goodness of others act as a mirror, reflecting the deepest parts of people's souls. And by merely existing as he does, Myshkin forces everyone around him to confront the moral contradictions in their own lives. Some will reject him, unable to bear the truth of their own moral failings. But no one remains unchanged. This is the true power of goodness. It reveals the truth. It does not force or demand. It simply exists. And by existing, it changes the world in ways that are often subtle, but ultimately lasting. 16. Goodness. A silent revolution. What is the ultimate truth we can take from this exploration of goodness and suffering? It is this. True goodness has a power that is deeper and more lasting than we might immediately realize. Even if the world rejects it, ridicules it, or seeks to destroy it, goodness will persist. It may not change the world overnight, nor will it lead to external rewards or recognition. But it inspires, influences, and transforms. Think about the moments in your own life when you have encountered true kindness, given without expectation, with no ulterior motive. It may have been something small, something insignificant, but did it not stay with you? Did it not challenge you, even for a moment, to reconsider your own actions, your own beliefs, and your own way of being in the world? This is the paradox of goodness. Though often dismissed as weakness, it is one of the most powerful forces in existence. It does not seek control, yet it influences. It does not fight, yet it changes. It does not demand, yet it inspires. And this power, as Dostoevsky knew, comes at a cost. 17. The true power of goodness. If goodness is truly so pure and so powerful, then why does it seem to lead to suffering? Why do the most honest, selfless, and compassionate people often face betrayal, disappointment, and hardship? This question, central to Dostoevsky's The Idiot, brings us to the final revelation that challenges everything we've explored so far. Throughout the novel, Prince Myshkin does everything in his power to bring kindness, understanding, and light into the world. Yet, instead of being rewarded, he is ridiculed, misunderstood, and ultimately destroyed. But Dostoevsky does not present this as a meaningless tragedy. In fact, he forces us to look deeper into the nature of suffering itself. There is an undeniable connection between goodness and suffering. And this is a theme that stretches across literature, philosophy, psychology, and spirituality. 18. The world's resistance to goodness. Many of the most revered figures in history, Jesus, Socrates, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr., all dedicated their lives to ideals of justice, truth, and compassion, and yet they all faced immense suffering. They were met with opposition, persecution, and in many cases, violent ends. But why? Why does the world seem to resist goodness rather than embrace it? One explanation lies in the idea that true goodness is disruptive. It challenges the status quo, forces people to confront their own moral contradictions. Most people, whether they realize it or not, are unwilling to be confronted with those contradictions. They want to live their lives without being forced to examine their own selfishness, their compromises, and their willingness to prioritize personal gain over moral integrity. 19. The invisible force of goodness, especially in its purest form, disrupts the social systems we've created to feel comfortable and secure. Myshkin does not play the game that society demands. He does not participate in deception, manipulation, or the pursuit of power. He is a living anomaly, and because of this, he becomes a threat. When society cannot categorize someone, it either forces them to conform or casts them aside. Myshkin, unwilling to conform, is rejected. But here's the paradox. Even when goodness is rejected or misunderstood, it still has a profound impact. Myshkin's sincerity and purity, though they cost him dearly, leave an indelible mark on those around him. 20. The hidden truth of goodness. Dostoevsky offers us a profound insight. The value of goodness does not lie in how others perceive it. It does not need to be validated by external rewards, success, or recognition. Goodness is valuable because it is good. It exists for its own sake, regardless of whether the world appreciates it. This idea is deeply challenging because it goes against everything we are taught to believe. We are conditioned to seek validation and to measure our worth by our achievements and results. True goodness, however, operates on an entirely different principle. It does not ask, "What will I get in return?" It simply exists. 21. The real purpose of goodness. So, if goodness is not about being rewarded or praised, what is its purpose? What is its true power if it does not change the world in the ways we might expect? The answer lies in something subtle, something that cannot be easily seen or quantified. Goodness does not necessarily change the world in dramatic ways. It may not lead to worldly success, and it may not result in external rewards. But what goodness does, even if the world does not immediately recognize it has changed the people it touches. Though Myshkin's life is full of suffering, his presence changes those around him. Even those who reject him, who mock him, or who betray him, cannot forget him. His sincerity, his compassion, and his unwavering belief in the goodness of others act as a mirror, reflecting the hidden parts of their souls. 22. The transformative power of goodness, the most profound power of goodness, is its ability to reveal the truth. It does not force or manipulate, it simply exists. And in existing, it forces others to confront their own nature. Some will embrace this truth. They will seek to align their actions with the goodness they see in Myshkin. Others, unable to bear the reflection of their own moral contradictions, will reject it. They will choose to turn away from the mirror, preferring the comfort of their self-justifications. But in the end, no one remains unchanged. 23. The final revelation, true goodness. The final revelation that Dostoevsky offers us is simple but profound. True goodness exists not because it is appreciated or rewarded, but because it is the right way to be. In a world driven by self-interest, competition, and manipulation, choosing to remain good even at the cost of suffering is one of the most powerful decisions a person can make. Myshkin's story is tragic, not because his goodness fails, but because it exposes the moral failings of those around him. It reveals to them the deep truth about their own heart's truths that they would rather not see. Yet, in the end, Myshkin does not regret his actions. He does not regret being good. He remains true to himself, even as the world around him crumbles. 24. Conclusion. The true measure of a life well lived. This is the final question that Dostoevsky leaves us with. Is it better to be wise in the ways of the world, or to protect ourselves and to play the game? Or is it better to remain true to our ideals, even at the cost of suffering? This is a choice that every person must face at some point in their life. And while the answer is not simple, perhaps the true measure of a life well lived is not in how much we have gained, but in how much light we have brought into the world, no matter how small or unnoticed that light may be. Goodness is not about being rewarded. It is not about winning. It is not about avoiding pain. True goodness exists not because the world values it, but because it is the right way to be. And in the end, whether the world calls you a fool or a saint, whether you are remembered or forgotten, whether your kindness is appreciated or rejected, what matters most is that you remained who you truly are. Because, in a world where deception and self-interest often rule, choosing to be good despite everything is the most powerful choice of all.